3 unread messages, 2 missed calls, and 1 picture that made the bile rise in my throat until it tasted like copper and fear. I stared at the cracked screen of my phone, shielding it from the deluge with a trembling hand. The image was grainy, taken from a distance, but the subject was unmistakable. Lily, my 19-year-old sister, walking out of her campus library, a stack of books pressed to her chest, completely oblivious to the person stalking her from the shadows. The caption beneath the photo was brief, brutal, and terrifyingly effective. Payment due by midnight, or we collect from her. I didn't need the threat spelled out. Every choice I made from that moment on would start and end with my sister. My thumb hovered over the delete button, as if erasing the message could erase the threat. But I knew better. The Ndrangheta didn't work on out of sight, out of mind. They worked on blood and interest, and my father had left us drowning in both. I shoved the phone back into the deep pocket of my trench coat, clutching it like a lifeline. The wind howled down the avenue, tearing at the fabric of my coat, whipping strands of wet red hair across my face. It was a miserable night in New York, the kind where the city seemed to turn its back on you, offering no shelter and no mercy. I bowed my head against the gale and walked faster, my boots splashing through puddles that were deep enough to soak my socks instantly. I needed $3,000. Tonight. It wasn't a fortune to the people who lived in the skyscraper I was approaching, a monolith of glass and steel that pierced the storm clouds. But to me, it was the difference between Lily graduating with a degree in literature and Lily disappearing into the back of a black van, never to be seen again. That fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, heavier than the debt, sharper than the wind. I checked the address again, squinting through the stinging rain. The Obsidian Tower. It sounded like a villain's lair from one of the comic books Lily used to read, but it was just another playground for the ultra-wealthy. I had the code the agency had texted me. Velvet Touch Escorts and Entertainment. A dignified name for a service that took 20% of your dignity and 40% of your tips. I wasn't an escort. I wasn't a dancer. I was an administrative assistant who had been laid off 2 weeks ago, desperate enough to answer a vague Craigslist ad that promised high pay for private parties. Just for tonight. I told myself that lie with every step. Just one night of humiliation to buy Lily another month of safety. The lobby was a cavern of marble and silence. I slipped in through the service entrance as instructed, grateful to avoid the judgment of the concierge. The air inside was dry and smelled of expensive sanitizer and white lilies. I dripped water onto the polished floor, creating a trail of evidence that I didn't belong here. My reflection in the elevator doors was a disaster. Pale skin, eyes that looked too wide and too green, and hair that had frizzed into a chaotic halo. Beneath the beige trench coat, I was wearing a ridiculous black lace set the agency had provided, scratching against my skin, making me feel exposed even with the coat buttoned to my chin. I pulled out my phone again to check the floor number. The screen was wet, the digits blurred by a spiderweb crack over the LCD. It looked like PH1, Penthouse 1. Or was it PH4N? The water smeared the text as I tried to wipe it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that made my hands shake. I couldn't be late. The client, a Mr. Smith, obviously a fake name, had been specific. 10:44 p.m., sharp, bachelor party. I pressed the button for the penthouse level. The elevator ascended with a smoothness that was almost unsettling, my ears popping as we climbed higher and higher above the city. I tried to rehearse the routine the agency coordinator had shown me. Walk in. Be confident. Don't touch. Keep the music loud. Get the cash. You can do this, Emily, I whispered to the empty car. For Lily. The doors slid open, revealing a hallway that was dimly lit and silent. There were no sounds of a party, no bass thumping from a stereo, no drunken laughter of men celebrating a last night of freedom, just a long corridor with plush carpet that swallowed the sound of my boots. I walked to the double doors at the end. There was no number, just a sleek black handle. I hesitated. Was this the right place? It had to be. There were only 2 penthouses, and the other one had a construction tarp over the door. This was it. I didn't knock. The instructions said, "Walk in. Surprise is part of the package." I took a deep breath, pushed the handle down, and stepped inside. The apartment was massive, a sprawling expanse of shadows and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the storm raging over the Manhattan skyline. The only light came from the city below, casting long, shifting rectangles of gray and blue across the dark hardwood floors. It didn't look like a bachelor party. It looked like a mausoleum for the living. The air was frigid, smelling of aged leather, cedarwood, and something sharper, like ozone or gun oil. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I intended, trembling slightly. Velvet touch sent me. Silence answered me. I took a few steps further in, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. In the center of the room, facing the window with his back to me, sat a man in a high-backed leather chair. He was motionless, a dark silhouette against the lightning that flashed outside. On the table beside him sat a crystal tumbler of amber liquid, untouched. Confusion warred with relief. Maybe I was early? Maybe the other guests hadn't arrived yet? Or maybe this was a private show for the groom. The agency sometimes booked one-on-one sessions, though they usually cost extra. If he was alone, maybe I could get this over with quickly. Strip, dance, get the money, run. "Mr. Smith?" I asked, moving closer. The man didn't turn. He didn't even stiffen. He possessed a stillness that felt unnatural, like a predator waiting in tall grass. "You're the entertainment?" I asked, the words feeling clumsy on my tongue. A stupid question. Of course he wasn't. He was wearing a suit jacket, his shoulders broad enough to block out a section of the Empire State Building. But my nerves were frying my synapses. For a split second, looking at his perfect posture and the way the shadows clung to him, I had the absurd thought that he looked like a statue, a piece of art meant to be looked at, not touched. He lifted the glass to his lips, took a slow sip, and placed it back down with a sharp clink. He still didn't turn. I have a playlist," I stammered, fumbling with my phone. "I can just start?" No objection. I took his silence for consent. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I found the track, some generic bass-heavy R&B song the agency recommended, and pressed play. The music blared from my tiny phone speakers, sounding tinny and pathetic in the cavernous room. I needed to move. I needed to do this. Every second I hesitated was a second closer to midnight, to the deadline for Lily. I unbuttoned my trench coat. The wet fabric peeled away, dropping to the floor with a heavy slap. The cold air of the apartment hit my skin, raising gooseflesh instantly. I was standing in nothing but the black lace lingerie and my boots. I felt ridiculous. I felt cheap. I forced a smile onto my face, a plastic mask of seduction that felt tight and foreign. "I hope you're watching," I said, trying to inject a sultry tone into my voice, but it cracked. I began to move. It wasn't graceful. I wasn't a dancer. I gyrated my hips to the beat, stepping closer to the chair. I ran my hands over my own body, trying to mimic what I'd seen in movies, but my limbs felt heavy, disjointed. I spun around, hoping to catch his eye, hoping for some reaction. Lust, amusement, anything that would tell me I was doing the job I was being paid for. The man slowly rotated the chair. The music seemed to die in the air, swallowed by the sheer intensity of his presence. He was terrifying. That was the first word that struck my mind. Not handsome, though he was devastatingly striking, with a jawline that could cut glass and hair as black as the abyss. He was terrifying because of his eyes. They were dark, endless pits that absorbed the light, tracking my movements with zero emotion. There was no lust in his gaze, no drunkenness, no amusement, just a cold, calculating assessment, as if he were deciding the most efficient way to disassemble me. He wasn't Mr. Smith. He wasn't a bachelor looking for a good time. I froze mid-step, my hand hovering over my hip. The music on my phone continued to tinny beat, sounding like a mockery in the silence between us. "You're not the client," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. I'm in the wrong apartment." He looked at me. He looked at the lace lingerie that barely covered anything. He looked at the pile of wet clothes on his pristine floor. Then he looked back at my face. He stood up. He unfolded from the chair with a fluid, lethal grace that made me take a stumbling step back. He was tall, looming over me by at least a foot, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him with surgical precision, tailored to hide violence and elegance. I reached for my coat on the floor, panic flaring in my chest. "I'm so sorry. The number on my phone was blurred. I'll just go. I'm leaving." I grabbed the wet trench coat and clutched it to my chest, backing away towards the door. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise the bone. "Stupid, Emily. Stupid. You walked into a stranger's house and stripped." "I didn't see anything," I babbled, terrified by the way he was walking towards me. He wasn't rushing. He was stalking. "I'm just going to leave. Please." I reached the door. My hand scrambled for the handle. A large, tanned hand slammed flat against the wood right next to my head, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I gasped, pressing my back against the door, trapping myself between the dark wood and his hard body. He was close enough now that I could smell him. Sandalwood, rain, and danger. The heat radiating from him was intense, burning through the thin lace of my lingerie. He reached past me. I flinched, expecting a blow, closing my eyes tight. Click. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My eyes snapped open. He hadn't hit me. He had locked us in. "You're not leaving," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a baritone that vibrated in my chest, dark and rich like expensive chocolate laced with poison. "Please," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "It was a mistake. I thought this was the party. I thought you were, I don't know." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. Up close, I could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, burning with a cold, controlled fury. He didn't believe me. He didn't see a confused woman desperate for money. He saw a threat. He saw an intruder who had breached his sanctuary. He tilted his head slightly, studying my fear with clinical detachment. His gaze dropped to my chest, then back to my eyes. But there was still no desire, only a mockery of the situation. "You walked in here," he murmured, his voice soft but edged with steel. "You put on a show. You treated my home like a cheap stage." He placed a hand on the door frame on the other side of my head, caging me in completely. "You mistook me for the stripper," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in a cruel, humorless quirk. "Now my turn." I started, but he cut me off. "Who sent you?" The question was whipped out, sharp and demanding. The mockery was gone, replaced by the authority of a man who was used to ordering executions before breakfast. Was it the Russians? Or did the O'Sullivans finally grow a spine? "What? No one!" I cried, shrinking against the wood. "The agency. Velvet Touch. I needed the money for my sister." He laughed, a dark, dry sound. "The sister defense. Classic. Tell me, Piccola, do you really expect me to believe that a woman just accidentally bypasses my security, walks into my penthouse, and starts dancing? You checked the perimeter. You scanned the room. You were stalling to see if I was alone." "I was nervous," I shouted, fear giving way to a spark of indignation. "I'm not a spy. I'm an administrative assistant with a mountain of debt. Look at me. Do I look like an assassin?" He stepped back slightly, sweeping his gaze over me again. "You look like a distraction. A honey trap designed to keep me occupied while a team breaches the service elevator." He grabbed my wrist. His grip was iron, inescapable, but not painful. Yet. He pulled me away from the door, dragging me toward the center of the room. "Let me go!" I struggled, digging my heels into the floor, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave. "Sit," he ordered, shoving me gently but firmly onto the leather sofa. I scrambled back against the cushions, clutching my wet coat like a shield. "You can't do this." "I'll scream." "Soundproof," he stated flatly. He walked over to a sideboard and picked up a phone. Not a cell phone, but a secure landline. He dialed a number without looking at the keypad, his eyes never leaving mine. "Silvio," he said into the receiver. "We have a breach. Penthouse 1. A woman, Redhead. Claims she's a stripper. Run her prints off the door handle. I want to know who she is, who her father is, and who owns her debt before I decide where to bury the body. My blood ran cold. Bury the body. He hung up and turned back to me. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and tossed it onto the chair he had been sitting in, then began to roll up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a tattoo of a black crest on his inner wrist. "You have 5 minutes until my head of security calls back," he said, walking toward me. "If you lie to me, you vanish. If you tell me the truth—" He stopped in front of the coffee table, leaning against it, crossing his arms over his chest. "Well, let's see if your truth is worth your life." "I told you the truth," I choked out, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. This wasn't a rich banker. This wasn't a CEO. The crest on his arm, the mention of burying bodies, the utter lack of fear. I had walked into the den of a monster. "Name," he demanded. "Emily," I whispered. "Emily Foster." "Foster," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "And the sister you mentioned?" "Lily. She's 19. She's at NYU. The words spilled out. "My dad, he died 3 months ago. He owed money. A lot of money. To bad people. They sent me a picture of her tonight. They said they'd take her if I didn't pay $3,000 by midnight." Marco Ravellini, though I didn't know his name yet, watched me. He seemed to be listening not just to my words, but to the cadence of my breathing, the pitch of my hysteria. "3,000, he said, his voice flat. "Peanuts." "It's my life," I snapped, the adrenaline overriding my self-preservation. "It's her life. Just because you have a penthouse doesn't mean the rest of us aren't drowning. I came here to debase myself for $3,000 because I love her. So go ahead, kill me if you want. But if you hurt her—" I stopped, breathing hard. I had just threatened a man who had casually discussed burying me. Marco stared at me. For a moment, the icy mask slipped. Something flickered in his eyes. Not pity, never pity, but recognition. Maybe even respect. Or maybe he was just calculating how much trouble it would be to clean my blood off his rug. The secure phone on the sideboard rang. The sound shattered the tension like glass. Marco held my gaze for 1 second longer before turning to answer it. "Speak," he said. I watched his back, my muscles coiled, wondering if I could make a run for the elevator, but he had the key, and the door was bolted. I was trapped. "Foster," Marco said into the phone, repeating my name. "Emily. Father. Robert Foster. Deceased. Gambling debts. Creditor. The Calabrese clan." He paused. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "No," Marco said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Not the Calabrese. They sold the debt last week. To the 'Ndrangheta. He turned slowly to look at me. The look on his face had changed. The annoyance was gone. The suspicion was different. It was heavier. "Okay," Marco said to the person on the other line. "Bring the file, and get the car ready." He hung up. He walked over to me. I pressed myself deeper into the sofa, trembling. He stopped right in front of me, towering over my seated form. "You have a debt with the 'Ndrangheta," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I whispered. "And you thought shaking your ass for $3,000 would save your sister from them." He shook his head, a gesture of dark amusement. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, do you, Emily? The interest alone is $5,000 a week. They weren't going to let her go tonight. They were just going to take the money and take her anyway." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" "No. The text said, 'They lie,'" he said simply. "That's what they do." He looked at his watch. 10:15 p.m. You have less than 2 hours before they grab her. "I have to go," I cried, scrambling to stand up. "I have to warn her. I have to—" He put a hand on my shoulder and pushed me back down. It wasn't violent, but it was immovable. "You aren't going anywhere," he said. "If you walk out that door, you're dead. My men are in the lobby. The 'Ndrangheta has spotters on this block. If they see you running, they'll know you failed." "Then what do I do?" I screamed, the tears finally spilling over. "Please, just let me go." Marco stared at me. He looked at my tear-streaked face, my trembling hands, the desperate love for my sister that was radiating off me in waves. He seemed to be weighing options, calculating risks and benefits on an invisible ledger. "You need protection," he said. "And money. And power. I have none of those things," I sobbed. "No," he agreed. "But I do." He stepped back and extended a hand toward me, not to hit me, not to grab me, but an offer. "Stand up, Emily," he commanded. I looked at his hand, large, calloused, dangerous. "Why?" I asked. "Because," Marco Ravellini said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that promised both salvation and damnation. "You just walked into the wrong apartment, but you might have stumbled into the only solution that keeps your sister alive. But it's going to cost you a lot more than a dance." He waited. "Get up." I hesitated, then reached out. My small, pale hand vanished into his grip. He pulled me to my feet, the heat of his skin searing mine. "Now," he said, pulling me toward the bedroom door. "Let's get you something to wear that doesn't make you look like a drowned rat. We have a debt to discuss." The silk shirt Marco had given me was warm, smelling of cedar and something darker, like burnt sugar and gun oil. It hung to my mid-thigh, swallowing my frame, while the drawstrings of the sweatpants were pulled tight to keep them from sliding off my hips. I stepped out of the bathroom, the steam trailing behind me, and found the main room transformed. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the storm against the reinforced glass. Marco stood by the minibar, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses. He didn't turn when I entered, but his posture shifted slightly, acknowledging my presence. "Sit," he commanded, his voice low and devoid of the threat that had been there 10 minutes ago. Now it was just business. I took a seat on the edge of the leather sofa, my hands clasping together to stop their trembling. It wasn't the cold anymore. It was the adrenaline crash. I was in a stranger's penthouse, half naked in his clothes, waiting to hear if my life was over or just beginning. He walked over and extended a glass to me. "Brandy, drink it. It helps with the shock." I took it, the crystal heavy and cool against my palm. I took a sip, the liquor burning a path down my throat, settling the nausea that had been roiling in my stomach since I saw that picture of Lily. "I ran a background check while you were in the shower," Marco said, leaning back against the heavy oak desk, crossing his ankles. He looked deceptively relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, dissecting me. "Emily Foster, 24, graduated with honors in business administration, laid off from Miller and Tate 3 weeks ago, no criminal record. Credit score destroyed by co-signing your father's loans." He paused, swirling the liquid in his glass. "You're clean. You're desperate. And you're invisible." "I don't feel invisible," I murmured, staring into the amber liquid. "I feel like a target." "You are a target," he corrected. "The Ndrangheta doesn't collect debts to pay bills, Emily. They collect leverage. Your father owed $150,000. The interest is compounding at 5% weekly. You walking in here with $3,000 tonight? It wouldn't have saved your sister. It would have just told them you were ready to pay. They would have taken the money, laughed, and taken her anyway." I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew it was bad. Dad had always been vague about who he borrowed from. But hearing the numbers, hearing the name of the organization, made the air leave my lungs. "So there's no way out," I whispered. "That's what you're telling me. I can't pay that. I'll never be able to pay that. Not on an administrative assistant's salary, no. And certainly not by dancing in strangers' apartments." Marco took a sip of his drink, his gaze never leaving my face. "But there is a way out. A trade." I looked up at him. "I have nothing to trade. You said it yourself. I have no money. I have no assets. You have a face that doesn't belong in my world," he said. He pushed off the desk and walked toward me, stopping just outside my personal space. The air around him felt charged, electric. "I am in the middle of closing the West Side Development Project. It is a legitimate construction contract worth over $500 million. The city commission is hesitant. They think the Ravellini family is nothing but thugs in expensive suits. They want stability. They want to see that I am not a warlord, but a man capable of settling down. He set his glass down on the coffee table with a deliberate click. I need a fiancé. I blinked, my brain struggling to bridge the gap between debt collectors and marriage proposals. A what? A fiancé, he repeated. Someone respectable, someone innocent, someone who can stand by my side at galas and charity dinners and look at me with adoration, convincing those old men that I am tamed. I need a shield, Emily, and you need a sword. You want me to pretend to be your fiancé? I asked, my voice rising slightly. For how long? 6 months. Until the contracts are signed and the ground is broken. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the back of the sofa, boxing me in. In exchange, I will buy your father's debt tonight. All of it. Principal and interest. I will burn the note. The 'Ndrangheta will never look at you again. And for your sister, I will assign a detail to her. Invisible security. She will finish her degree without ever knowing a monster breathed in her direction. I stared at him. It was a deal with the devil. I knew that. But as I looked at Marco, at the hard lines of his jaw, the absolute, unshakable confidence in his eyes, I realized he was the only thing standing between Lily and a fate worse than death. You would pay $150,000 just for an image? I asked. The deal is worth $500 million, Marco said dryly. Paying your debt is a rounding error. The value is in your clean record and your desperation. I need someone who won't betray me because they have everything to lose. You fit the profile. He pulled a phone from his pocket. Not the secure landline this time, but a sleek black smartphone. It is 10:55. The deadline is midnight. Do we have a deal? I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the morality of living with a crime boss. I thought about Lily's smile. I thought about the fear that had been my constant companion for months. Yes, I breathed. Yes, I'll do it. Marco nodded once. No smile, just satisfaction. He dialed a number and put the phone to his ear, his eyes locking onto mine. Get me Calabresi, he ordered. A pause. Then his voice dropped, becoming silky and terrifying. Giovanni, I hear you're holding paper on Robert Foster. I'm buying it. Send the wire instructions. Now. He listened, his expression darkening. I don't care about your future plans for the girls, Giovanni. The debt is mine. The girls are mine. If you send a single car near NYU, if anyone even looks at the younger one, I will consider it an act of war. And you know I don't leave survivors. The silence in the room was deafening. I held my breath, clutching the brandy glass like a lifeline. Good, Marco said. He tapped a few times on his tablet, which lay on the table. Funds sent. Confirm receipt. Another pause. Stay away from my family, Giovanni. He hung up and tossed the phone onto the cushion beside me. It is done. You are free of them. The relief hit me so hard I actually gasped, a tear slipping down my cheek. The weight that had been crushing my chest for 90 days vanished in seconds. Thank you, I choked out. I don't. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Marco said, his voice hard again. You have sold your next 6 months to me, and I am a demanding owner. He walked over to the window, looking out at the city he clearly thought he owned. There are rules, Emily. If we do this, we do it perfectly. Rule 1. You never leave this penthouse without my security team, ever. You are now a target for my enemies. I understand, I said, wiping my face. Being a target in a penthouse was better than being a target in a dark alley. Rule 2. Total transparency. If you get a text, I see it. If you call your sister, I listen. No secrets. Fine, I agreed. I have nothing to hide. Rule 3. Marco turned back to me, and for the first time he hesitated. He walked back until he was standing directly in front of me. We have to sell this. To the staff. To the press. To the world. It has to look real. Which means you sleep in my bed. My heart skipped a beat. You want me to. I want you to sleep. He cut in firmly. I do not require sex as part of this contract. I can get sex anywhere in this city. I do not need to coerce a desperate woman. But my housekeeper arrives at 7. My security monitors the halls. If you are in the guest room, they will know it is a sham. Rumors spread. So you sleep in my bed, every night. He searched my face, looking for revulsion or fear. Can you handle that? I looked at him. He was dangerous, yes, but he had just saved my sister without blinking. He was a monster, but he was a rational one. I can handle it, I said steadily. Good. He walked to a dresser and returned with a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a massive emerald-cut diamond ring. Give me your hand. I extended my left hand. He slid the ring onto my finger. It was cold, heavy, and flashed brilliantly in the dim light. It fits well enough, he muttered, not letting go of my hand immediately. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, sending a jolt of heat up my arm. You understand what this ring means? It means you are under my protection. It means you are Ravellini property. Anyone who touches you answers to me. Property, I repeated. It should have felt degrading. Instead, it felt safe. Come, he said, pulling me up. You look exhausted. He led me to the master bedroom. It was vast, dominated by a king-sized bed with dark gray linens and a fireplace that flickered with low gas flames. The bathroom is there. I'll have a wardrobe sent tomorrow. Go to sleep, Emily. He turned to leave. Marco? I called out. He stopped at the door. Yes? Thank you. For Lily. I won't let you down. He glanced back, his expression unreadable in the shadows. See that you don't. Sleep well, fiancé. He closed the door. I was alone. I looked at the ring again, then climbed into the massive bed. It smelled of him, sandalwood and power. For the first time in months, I didn't check the locks on the windows. I didn't push a chair against the door. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. I woke briefly when the door opened hours later. I feigned sleep as the mattress dipped. Marco got in beside me. He didn't touch me. He stayed on his side, a solid wall of heat. But the tension in the room was palpable. It wasn't sexual, not exactly. It was the awareness of a predator sharing its den. I fell back asleep to the sound of his steady breathing, feeling safer than I had in my entire life. Sunlight woke me. I reached out, but the other side of the bed was cold. Marco was gone. I sat up, spotting a note on the bedside table written on heavy cardstock. Stylist at 10. Lunch at 1. Wear the green dress. M. Short. Commanding. Typical. A knock at the door preceded a petite woman with gray hair entering with a tray. Buongiorno, signorina. I am Maria. She set coffee down. Mr. Marco asked me to inform you that your sister, Lily, was successfully moved to the secure housing near her campus this morning. She believes she won a housing lottery scholarship. My breath caught. He had handled everything, even the lie to keep Lily from worrying. Thank you, Maria, I said, my voice thick with emotion. He is a hard man, Maria said, noticing the ring on my finger. But he protects what is his. Coffee is black. Drink. She left, and I obeyed. I drank the coffee, feeling the caffeine sharpen my senses. I walked into the closet Marco had mentioned. A rack of clothes had been wheeled in, but one garment bag stood out. I unzipped it. Inside was a dress of deep emerald green silk. It was simple, backless, and looked like liquid money. At 10 a.m., the stylist arrived. I endured the hair and makeup session, watching myself transform in the mirror. The pale, terrified girl from last night vanished. In her place was a woman with glossy red waves, sharp eyeliner, and a dress that hugged every curve like a second skin. I walked out into the living room at 12:55. Marco was standing by the elevator, talking to a hulking security guard. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. His eyes raked over me, starting at the heels, traveling up the slit of the dress, lingering on the exposed skin of my back as I turned, and finally meeting my eyes. The air seemed to leave the room. He didn't smile, but his pupils dilated, swallowing the brown of his irises. He walked over, stopping inches from me. He reached out, his knuckles grazing my bare shoulder, adjusting a strap that didn't need adjusting. Good, he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. You look the part. I aim to please, I replied, lifting my chin. Remember the rules. he said, his gaze dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back up. Out there, you adore me. I can be very convincing, I challenged. He offered his arm. Then let's go. My turn to show you off. I took his arm. It was like holding onto a steel beam. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing us together, I knew there was no going back. I was playing a dangerous game, but for the first time, I felt like I might actually win. The debt was paid. Lily was safe. And I was standing next to the king. 3 weeks inside the penthouse had established a rhythm that was both terrifyingly abnormal and strangely domestic. My world had shrunk to 4,000 square feet of marble, glass, and modern art, yet it felt larger than the cramped apartment I had shared with Lily, simply because the ceiling of anxiety had been lifted. The debt was gone. The threats had ceased. My phone no longer rang with blocked numbers that made my blood run cold. I had expected to be a prisoner, bored and listless, waiting for the master of the house to return. But boredom was a luxury I couldn't afford. And Marco Ravellini was not a man who tolerated useless things in his orbit. By the second week, I couldn't stand the silence of the days while he was out managing assets, which I assumed was a euphemism for terrifying construction unions or laundering money. I had started organizing. It began with the kitchen pantry, which was stocked with gourmet ingredients that no one used, arranged in a chaos that offended my administrative soul. Then I moved to the library. Finally, I had dared to enter his home office. It was a disaster of brilliance. Blueprints were scattered over the mahogany desk, mixed with financial ledgers and permits. I spent 2 days organizing them by project, date, and priority, color-coding the files with sticky notes I found in a drawer. When Marco had come home that night and seen the desk, he had stopped dead in the doorway. I had braced myself for anger. For him to tell me I had overstepped, that I shouldn't touch his business. Instead, he had walked to the desk, run a finger over the neatly stacked permits for the West Side project, and looked at me with a raised eyebrow. Efficient, was all he said. But the next morning, a brand new laptop was waiting on the dining table for me, with access to his legitimate scheduling software. I wasn't just the fiancé anymore. I was the manager of his public image. Tonight, however, the administrative assistant was retiring, and the trophy wife was clocking in. The emerald dress hung on the back of the door like a silent challenge. It was a masterpiece of silk and daring, with a neckline that plunged dangerously low, and a back that was non-existent. It was the color of envy, of money, of deep forests where things went to hide. "You have 20 minutes, Emily," Marco called from the living room. His voice was calm, deep, and carried that effortless authority that still sent a shiver down my spine, even after sharing a bed with him for 21 nights. I stepped into the dress, the silk cool against my skin. It fit with a precision that was almost unnerving, hugging my waist and flaring slightly at the hips. I fastened the diamond necklace he had given me. Another prop, another shackle, and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't Emily Foster, the girl who clipped coupons and worried about tuition. She was a predator. Her red hair was styled in sleek old Hollywood waves, her lips painted a dark crimson, her eyes sharp and guarded. I looked like I belonged to him. I looked like I could survive him. I walked out into the living area. Marco was waiting by the elevator, checking his watch. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him so perfectly. It looked like it had been woven directly onto his body. The stark black and white contrasted with his olive skin and dark eyes, making him look devastatingly handsome and utterly lethal. He looked up as I approached. The motion of checking his watch froze. His hand lowered slowly to his side. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The way his gaze darkened, the way his eyes tracked the line of my throat down to the swell of my breasts and the curve of my hip, was louder than any compliment. It was a physical weight, heavy and hot. "Too much?" I asked, my voice sounding breathier than I intended. Marco took 2 long strides toward me, stopping just inside my personal space. He reached out, his knuckles brushing the bare skin of my arm, sending a cascade of goosebumps racing across my flesh. "No," he murmured, his voice rough, "just enough to make every man in the room hate me, and every woman hate you. That's the goal, isn't it?" I replied, tilting my chin up. "United front. Us against the world. Us against the world, he repeated, the corner of his mouth lifting in that half smile that was becoming my favorite danger sign. Turn around. I obeyed. I felt his fingers at the nape of my neck, checking the clasp of the necklace. His touch lingered, warm and calloused, against the sensitive skin of my spine. For a moment, I forgot about the contract. I forgot about the gala. I just felt him. The sheer, overwhelming reality of him standing behind me. Let's go, he said, stepping back abruptly, the moment broken. The car is waiting. The ride to the gala was silent. The partition up between us and the driver. The city blurred past the tinted windows, a streak of gold and red lights. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I didn't open it. I pulled it out and handed it to Marco. Rule number 2, total transparency. He took it, unlocked it with the passcode I had given him, and read the message. His expression didn't change, but the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease by a fraction of an inch. It's your sister, he said, handing the phone back to me. I snatched it, reading the text greedily. Lily. Hey Em, just finished my first week of exams. I think I aced the lit paper. The dorm is actually super quiet, I love it. Going to get pizza with some girls from the floor. Hope the big work event goes well. Love you. I read it twice. 3 times. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, threatening my carefully applied eyeliner. She was safe. She was eating pizza. She was taking exams. She was living the life she was supposed to live, completely oblivious to the fact that her sister was currently sitting in a bulletproof Mercedes next to a capo, wearing $50,000 worth of jewelry. She's happy, I whispered, the relief washing through me like a drug. She is safe, Marco corrected, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The detail reported in. She aced the exam, by the way. She studied at the library until 2 a.m. for 3 nights in a row. My men watched the door the entire time. I looked at him, truly looked at him. In the shifting light of the street lamps, his profile was sharp, unyielding. He was a criminal. He was violent. But he was the most honorable man I had ever met when it came to his word. Thank you, Marco, I said softly. He turned to look at me then. You are paying for it, Emily. Tonight. With every smile. With every lie. Do not make me regret the investment. I won't, I promised. And I meant it. The gala was held at the Pierre Hotel, a bastion of old New York money and power. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and designer gowns, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the underlying stench of ambition. As we entered, I felt the shift in the room. Heads turned. Conversations stalled. It was one thing to hear that Marco Ravellini had a fiancée. It was another to see her. I tightened my grip on his arm, feeling the hard muscle beneath the tuxedo jacket. Chin up, he whispered against my ear, his breath hot. You own this room. Because you're with me. We moved through the crowd like sharks cutting through a school of fish. Marco introduced me to politicians, real estate tycoons, and union leaders. I played my part perfectly. I laughed at their unfunny jokes. I gazed at Marco with adoring eyes. I let him rest his hand possessively on the small of my back, his thumb tracing slow, distracting circles on my bare skin. Marco, you devil! A booming voice interrupted us near the champagne fountain. A man in his 60s, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite, approached us. He was holding a scotch, his eyes sharp and calculating. I recognized him from the files I had organized. Vittorio Bianchi, a rival associate, wealthy, influential, and according to Marco's notes, a snake. Vittorio. Marco greeted him with a nod that was polite but cold. Enjoying the evening? I am now, Vittorio said, his gaze sliding to me. It wasn't a look of appreciation. It was a look of appraisal, like I was a racehorse he was considering betting on. So, this is the mystery woman. The one who finally put a leash on the Ravellini wolf. Emily, Marco said, his hand tightening slightly on my waist. My fiancée, Emily, Vittorio repeated, stepping closer. I don't believe we've met. I know all the families in the tri-state area. Foster. I don't recall a foster family. It was a dig. a subtle way of asking who the hell I was, and confirming that I was a nobody. "I'm not from the families, Mr. Bianchi," I said, keeping my voice smooth and steady. "I prefer to keep my background private." Vittorio chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Private. Of course. Marco always did like to pick up strays. Tell me, my dear, what did you do before you landed in Penthouse 1? Model? Actress? Or just professional arm candy?" The insult hung in the air, heavy and gross. I felt Marco tense beside me. I knew he was about to speak, about to cut Vittorio down with a threat or a sharp word. But I squeezed his arm, signaling him to wait. This was my job. I was the shield. I released Marco's arm and took a small step toward Vittorio, smiling a smile that showed teeth but no warmth. "Actually, Mr. Bianchi," I said, my tone conversational, but loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear. "I was an asset manager. My specialty was identifying undervalued properties, restructuring high-risk portfolios, and eliminating toxic liabilities before they bankrupted the entire firm." I let my eyes drift pointedly to the much younger, bored-looking woman hanging off Vittorio's arm, then back to him. "I have a talent for spotting things that look expensive, but offer zero return on investment," I continued, sweet as poison. "Marco didn't hire me. He partnered with me. Because in a room full of people who inherited their power, he needed someone who knows how to actually count it." Silence rippled through the immediate group. Vittorio's smirk vanished. He blinked, clearly taken aback that the arm candy had just verbally eviscerated him using corporate speak. Marco let out a low, dark laugh. He pulled me back against his side, his grip firm and possessive. "She has a sharp eye, Vittorio," Marco said, his voice laced with pride. "I'd check your portfolio if I were you. You look a little over-leveraged." Vittorio sputtered something incoherent and excused himself quickly, dragging his date away. As soon as he was gone, Marco leaned down, his lips brushing my ear. "Remind me never to piss you off in a boardroom," he murmured. "He was rude," I whispered back, my heart hammering from the confrontation. "He was testing you," Marco said, "and you didn't just pass. You buried him." He turned his head, his nose grazing my cheek. "You look magnificent when you're defending me, Emily. It suits you." The heat in his voice was undeniable. It wasn't acting. For the rest of the night, the dynamic shifted. Marco wasn't just parading me around. He was keeping me close. His touches lingered longer. His eyes sought mine constantly, dark with a hunger that had nothing to do with the buffet. By the time we left at 1 a.m., my feet were screaming in protest against the stilettos, but my adrenaline was still high. The car ride back was charged with electricity. Marco sat closer to me than before, his thigh pressing against mine. He didn't check his phone. He watched me. We rode the elevator up to the penthouse in silence, the air thick enough to choke on. When the doors opened, I kicked off my heels immediately, groaning as my feet hit the cool marble floor. "Torture devices," I muttered, picking them up by the straps. "Vanity requires sacrifice," Marco said, loosening his tie. He tossed his jacket onto the sofa and walked over to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of water, not alcohol. "You did well tonight," he said, handing me a glass. "Better than well." The commission chairman was impressed. "He thinks I've found a stabilizing influence." "I just told them what they wanted to hear," I said, taking a sip. "It's just business, right?" Marco looked at me over the rim of his glass. "Just business." But he didn't move away. He set his glass down and pointed to the armchair. "Sit." "I'm fine. I just need to go to bed," I said, suddenly wary of the intensity in his gaze. "Sit, Emily," he repeated. It wasn't a bark. It was a low rumble. I sat. Marco knelt in front of me. My breath hitched in my throat. The great Marco Ravellini, on his knees. He reached out and took my right foot in his large, warm hands. "Marco, you don't have to. Quiet," he murmured. His thumbs dug into the arch of my foot, finding the knot of tension instantly. I gasped, my head falling back against the chair. It was agony and ecstasy all at once. He worked the muscles with a skill that surprised me, his hands strong but strangely gentle. "You stood for 4 hours in these," he said, his voice vibrating through the soles of my feet. You defended my name against Bianchi. You protected the family image." He moved to the other foot, his fingers sliding up my ankle, grazing the sensitive skin of my calf. "I was just doing my job," I whispered, watching him through half-closed eyes. He looked up. His eyes were black pools, swirling with something that terrified and thrilled me. He was still kneeling between my legs, his hands on my calves now, his thumbs tracing the line of my shin. "You are good at your job," he said. The air between us crackled. He leaned forward. I leaned forward. The space between us shrank to inches. I could smell the brandy on his breath, mixed with the mint from the gala. I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I wanted him to kiss me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I didn't just want the safety. I wanted the danger. I wanted the man who had bought my life and locked me in his tower. Marco's gaze dropped to my lips. His hands slid up to my knees, pushing the silk of the dress slightly higher. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. "Emily," he breathed, his voice a ragged whisper. I parted my lips. "Marco." He froze. The sound of his name seemed to snap a chord in him. The darkness in his eyes cleared, replaced by a wall of ice. He blinked, shaking his head slightly as if waking from a trance. He pulled his hands away from me as if I were on fire. He stood up abruptly, towering over me, buttoning his collar that he had just loosened. His face was a mask of stone. "It's late," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the heat that had been there seconds ago. "We have an early morning. The architects are coming at 8. I sat there, reeling, my skin cold where his hands had been. The rejection stung more than I expected. It felt like a slap. "Right," I said, my voice trembling. "The architects. Go to bed, Emily," he said, turning his back on me to face the window. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. I have work to finish." "But the rules," I started, confusion warring with hurt. "You said—" "Screw the rules," he snapped, his fists clenching at his sides. "Just for tonight. Go." I stood up, grabbing my shoes. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I walked down the hallway to the master bedroom, the emerald dress swishing around my legs, feeling less like armor and more like a costume. I closed the door and leaned against it, closing my eyes. He had wanted to. I knew he had. But he had stopped, because I was an asset, because I was a contract, because men like Marco Ravellini didn't fall for women like me. They used us and discarded us when the deal was done. I stripped off the dress and scrubbed the makeup from my face, revealing the pale, tired girl underneath. I crawled into the massive, empty bed, curling into a ball in the center. It was safe here. Lily was safe. The debt was paid. I had everything I had asked for. So why did the empty space beside me feel so much like loneliness? I fell asleep listening to the silence of the penthouse, wishing for the sound of the door opening, wishing for the monster to come back and claim his territory. But the door stayed shut. And for the first time, the lock on the inside felt like it was keeping me in, not keeping the world out. The restaurant Marco intended to acquire was a study in understated oppression. Named L'Ombra, it sat nestled in the heart of Tribeca, a fortress of dark wood, heavy velvet drapes, and lighting so low it felt less like dining and more like conspiring. We were seated at the best table in the house, a semi-private booth that offered a clear view of the entrance while shielding us from the prying eyes of the other patrons. It was a strategic position, chosen not for romance but for survival, a fact that became increasingly clear as the night wore on. Technically, this was a date. A public outing designed to feed the rumor mill and solidify the narrative of the love-struck Don and his respectable fiancé. But the air between us was brittle, snapping with the unresolved tension from the night before. Marco hadn't touched me since the moment he pulled away in the penthouse living room, leaving me cold and confused in the armchair. He had slept in the guest room, and our morning interactions had been limited to curt nods and monosyllabic instructions about the schedule. "The risotto is excellent," Marco said, his voice cutting through the silence. He wasn't looking at his food. His eyes were scanning the perimeter of the room, tracking the movements of the waiters, the guests, the shadows near the kitchen. "I'm sure it is," I replied, pushing the rice around my plate with a silver fork. So, are you buying this place for the food or for the sightlines? Marco's gaze flickered to me, dark and unreadable. I'm buying it because it washes money efficiently. The kitchen moves volume, the wine list is overpriced, and the back exit leads directly to a street that doesn't have traffic cameras. It's a logistical asset. Everything is an asset to you, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. Restaurants, buildings, people. He set his wine glass down slowly. The crystal chimed against the table, a stark sound in the hum of the room. You are angry. I'm not angry, I lied, taking a sip of water to cool the heat rising in my cheeks. I'm just tired of trying to figure out where the act ends and the person begins. Last night was a mistake, he interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, rough timbre that vibrated in my chest. I crossed a line. It won't happen again. Because it's not in the contract? I challenged, leaning forward. Or because you're terrified that if you actually let someone in, you might lose your edge. Marco's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to reach across the table and shake me, or kiss me, or maybe both. I am trying to keep you alive, Emily. Distraction gets people killed in my world. Attachments are weaknesses. I'm already an attachment, I whispered. I'm wearing your ring. I'm living in your house. You paid $150,000 for me. It's a little late to pretend I'm just a line item on a spreadsheet. He opened his mouth to respond, a flash of genuine emotion finally breaking through his mask. But the words never came. The front window of the restaurant exploded inward. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical force. 1 second we were arguing about feelings. The next, the world dissolved into a cacophony of shattering glass and screaming patrons. Shards of the window flew across the dining room like diamond shrapnel. Marco moved before my brain could even process the threat. He didn't duck. He lunged. He vaulted over the table, crashing into me, his heavy body slamming me down into the leather banquette. He covered me completely, shielding my head with his arms, burying my face in his chest. Pop, pop, pop. The sounds were distinct, rhythmic, and terrifyingly familiar from movies. But in real life, they were deafening. Gunfire, suppressed, professional, and close. Stay down, Marco roared, his voice a command that brooked no argument. He pulled a gun from a holster beneath his jacket, a sleek black weapon that had been invisible moments ago. He rose to a crouch, firing 2 shots over the top of the booth. I heard a wet thud, and a scream cut short. The smell of cordite and dust filled my nose, choking me. Who are they? I screamed, clutching the lapels of his jacket, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Ndrangheta, Marco snarled, firing again. They didn't accept the buyout. They want blood. He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. We move, now. Keep your head down and stay behind me. He hauled me up, keeping his body between me and the shattered front of the restaurant where 3 men in ski masks were advancing, weapons raised. Marco fired with terrifying precision, taking one of them down with a shot to the shoulder, buying us a second of time. We ran, not toward the exit, but toward the kitchen. The other diners were scrambling under tables, screaming, creating a chaotic obstacle course. Marco shoved a waiter out of the line of fire, never stopping his forward momentum. We burst through the swinging double doors into the kitchen. It was a labyrinth of stainless steel, steam, and panic. Chefs were cowering in corners. Pots were boiling over on the stoves. "The back alley!" Marco shouted, pointing toward a heavy steel door at the far end. "Go! I'll cover you!" I sprinted, my heels slipping on the greasy tile floor. I kicked them off without breaking stride, running barefoot through the debris. Marco was behind me, walking backward, his gun trained on the doors we had just come through. I reached the exit, my hand slamming against the push bar. It opened with a metallic groan into the cool night air. "Marco!" I turned to call him. That was when I saw it. Marco was focused on the main doors, expecting the gunman to follow the path we had taken. But in the reflection of a stainless steel refrigerator to his right, I saw movement. The service entrance. A side door used for deliveries. It was opening slowly, a gun barrel emerging, aimed directly at Marco's exposed flank. He didn't see it. The noise of the kitchen, the hissing steam, the shouting, masked the sound of the door. Time seemed to warp, stretching into a slow-motion nightmare. If I stayed silent, if I just ran, I would be safe. But he would be dead. The man who paid my father's debt. The man who protected Lily. The man who had massaged my feet and looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. "Marco, right, kitchen door!" I screamed, my voice tearing at my throat. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look at me to verify. He trusted my voice instantly. He spun, dropping to one knee, and fired blindly toward the service entrance. The gunman, caught by surprise, fired wide. The bullet pinged off a hanging pot rack, inches from Marco's head. Marco's return fire was true. The attacker crumpled backward, the door swinging shut on his body. Marco looked at me then, for just a fraction of a second. His eyes were wild, dilated, burning with an intensity that could scorch the earth. There was no asset in that look. There was only raw, primal recognition. "Go!" he roared. I scrambled into the alley. A black-armored SUV was already screeching around the corner, Marco's security team having been alerted by the shots. The back door flew open before the car even stopped. I dove inside, scrambling across the leather seats. Marco dove in right behind me, shouting, "Go, go, go!" to the driver. The SUV peeled out, tires smoking, slamming me back against the seat. Bullets sparked against the rear window, leaving spiderweb cracks in the bulletproof glass but failing to penetrate. We swerved onto the main road, weaving through traffic, leaving the chaos of Lombra behind. For a long minute, the only sound in the car was our ragged breathing. Marco was checking his magazine, reloading with practiced shaky hands. He looked at the driver. "Status? Clear, boss. We have 2 pursuit vehicles, but Rocco and the tail team are intercepting. We're heading to the safe house. The penthouse is compromised." "Do it," Marco said. He turned to me. He grabbed my face between his hands, his fingers digging into my cheeks, tilting my head up. His eyes frantically scanned my face, my neck, my torso. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Emily, answer me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I gasped, my hands coming up to grip his wrists. "I'm okay. Are you?" "You saw him," he breathed, staring into my eyes. "You saw the man in the service door." "Yes." "You saved my life," he said, the words heavy, absolute. "I was dead. You warned me." "I told you," I managed to whisper, fighting the shock that was starting to set in. "I'm a good investment." Marco let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He pulled me into him, crushing me against his chest. His arms wrapped around me like steel bands, holding me so tight it was hard to breathe. But I didn't care. I buried my face in the crook of his neck, smelling the gunpowder and the sweat and the underlying scent of him. "You are not an investment," he growled against my hair. "You are... God, you are everything." He held me for the entire ride. He didn't let go even when he had to issue orders to his team on the phone. He kept one arm locked around me, anchoring me to him. We drove for nearly 40 minutes, leaving the city lights behind, heading north into the dense darkness of the woodlands. The SUV finally turned onto a gravel road, winding up a steep hill surrounded by thick pine trees. The safe house wasn't a shack. It was a modern fortress of concrete and glass, cantilevered over a ravine, isolated and impenetrable. The car stopped. Marco ushered me out, his body shielding mine until we were inside the heavy steel doors. The interior was cold, the air stagnant. It hadn't been used in a while. Marco hit a switch, and emergency lights flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows across the minimalist furniture. "Lock it down," Marco ordered the driver who had carried our bags in. "Patrol the perimeter. No one gets within a mile of this place." "Yes, sir." The guard left, the heavy door thudding shut, sealing us in. Silence descended. The adrenaline that had kept me moving began to curdle into something else. A shaking, frantic energy that needed release. I looked at Marco. He was standing in the center of the room, his jacket discarded on the floor, his white shirt stained with soot, and a smear of blood that wasn't his. He was looking at me with that same intensity from the kitchen, but magnified 1,000 times. "You could have run," he said, his voice rough. "When we were in the kitchen, you were at the exit. You could have run out and saved yourself. You stopped to warn me. I wasn't going to leave you," I said, my voice trembling. "We had a deal." "Fuck the deal," Marco swore, crossing the room in 2 strides. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip desperate. "That wasn't the deal. The deal was money for safety. The deal was a performance. What you did back there, that wasn't acting." "No," I admitted, looking up at him, feeling the heat radiating from his body. "It wasn't." "Why?" he demanded, shaking me slightly. "Why would you risk your life for a monster? For a man who bought you? Because you're not just a monster," I cried out, the emotions of the last 3 weeks finally boiling over. "Because you saved Lily. Because you held my hair back when I was sick from the stress. Because you look at me like I'm a person, not a thing. Because I feel safe with you, Marco. Even when people are shooting at us, I feel safe with you." Marco stared at me, his chest heaving. The walls he had built, the coldness, the professional distance, the rules, crumbled. I saw the man beneath the dawn, the man who was terrified, lonely, and starving. "I tried to stop this," he whispered, his hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb brushing my bottom lip. "I tried to keep you at arm's length. I tried to tell myself you were just a job. You failed," I murmured, leaning into his touch. "I know," he groaned. He kissed me. It wasn't a gentle movie star kiss. It was a collision. It was violent and desperate, fueled by the terror of near death and the rage of survival. His mouth crushed mine, demanding, claiming. I opened to him instantly, wrapping my arms around his neck, pulling him closer. I needed to feel him. I needed to know he was alive, solid, real. He lifted me up, my legs wrapping around his waist instinctively. He carried me through the unfamiliar house, kicking open a door to a bedroom, not breaking the kiss for a second. He pressed me against the wall, his hands roaming over my body, possessing every inch of me. "You're mine," he growled against my throat, biting lightly at the sensitive skin. "You understand? No more contracts, no more pretending. You are mine." "I'm yours," I gasped, my fingers tangling in his dark hair. "I've been yours since you locked that door." He carried me to the bed, falling with me onto the mattress. The clothes we were wearing, the expensive dress, the ruined shirt, were barriers that were torn away with frantic haste. There was no finesse, only need. The darkness of the room wrapped around us. But we were burning. When we finally came together, it was an exorcism. We were driving out the fear of the bullets, the sound of the glass shattering, the image of the gunman in the doorway. It was raw and absolute. I cried out his name, and he answered with a reverence that shook me to my core. Later, much later, the storm outside had returned, rain lashing against the glass of the safe house. We lay tangled in the sheets, limbs heavy with exhaustion. Marco was on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes, the other holding me tight against his side. My head rested on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. "Emily?" His voice was a rumble in the dark. "Yeah?" He moved his arm, turning his head to look at me. The hardness was gone from his face. He looked younger, vulnerable. "I lied to you," he said softly. I tensed slightly. "About what?" "About the reason I bought your debt." I pushed myself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "You said it was for the image, for the construction deal." "It was," he said, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "But that's not the only reason. When you walked into my penthouse that first night, when you were dancing, looking so terrified but so determined, I didn't lock the door because I thought you were an assassin." "Why did you lock it?" I asked, my breath catching. "Because I knew that if I let you walk out, I would tear the city apart trying to find you again," Marco confessed, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "I wanted you before I knew your name. The deal, the fiancé scheme, it was just an excuse to keep you." I stared at him, stunned. "You mean, I fell for the girl who mistook me for a stripper," he said, a small, crooked smile touching his lips. "And tonight, when I saw that gun pointed at me, my only thought wasn't that I was going to die. It was that I wouldn't get to tell you. My eyes filled with tears. "You told me now. I'm telling you now," he corrected. He pulled me down, kissing me softly, sweetly this time. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you. No more acts, Emily. This is real." I rested my forehead against his. "It's real." We lay there in the quiet of the safe house, the world outside full of enemies and danger. But inside, in the circle of his arms, the war felt very far away. The contract had burned up in the fire of the kitchen. What was left was something stronger, something forged in steel and blood. "Go to sleep," Marco whispered, pulling the duvet over us. "I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." "I know," I said, closing my eyes. And for the first time, I didn't just believe him because I had to. I believed him because I felt it in my bones. The monster hadn't just captured the princess. He had given her the keys to the castle, and I wasn't planning on leaving. The gray light of dawn was filtering through the reinforced shutters of the safe house when I woke up. The bed was still warm where Marco had been, but he was already up. I pushed myself up on my elbows, the sheet pooling at my waist, my body aching in a way that was both exhausting and exhilarating. The memories of the night before, the frantic escape from the restaurant, the desperate drive, the way we had collided in this bed, flooded back, flushing my skin with heat. But the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The intimacy of the night had evaporated, replaced by the cold, metallic tension of morning. Marco was standing by the heavy steel door, checking the load on a fresh magazine. He wasn't wearing the ruined tuxedo. He was dressed in tactical gear. Black cargo pants, heavy boots, and a tight black t-shirt that clung to his chest. A Kevlar vest sat on the chair next to him, along with a shoulder holster. He looked like a soldier preparing for a war he didn't expect to return from. "You're leaving," I said, my voice raspy from sleep and the screaming I'd done in the car. Marco looked up. His eyes were hard, the soft vulnerability I had seen in the dark completely gone. He was the dawn again. "The city is falling apart," he said, sliding the magazine into the Glock with a sharp click. "The attack on the restaurant wasn't just a hit. It was a declaration. The Ndrangheta has moved on 3 of my construction sites overnight. They burned a warehouse in Queens an hour ago. If I don't show my face, if I don't strike back now, the commission will think I'm weak. And if they think I'm weak, they'll let the wolves in." I climbed out of bed, wrapping the duvet around me like a toga, ignoring the cold floor on my bare feet. "You can't go out there. They tried to kill you 6 hours ago. They'll be waiting." "I know," he said, pulling the vest over his head and fastening the Velcro straps. "That's why I'm going to meet them." I called for a sit-down, a parley. "A parley?" I repeated, skepticism dripping from my voice. "Marco, they shot up a restaurant full of civilians. They don't want to talk. They want territory," Marco corrected, grabbing a dark jacket to cover the tactical gear. "And they want to know why I bought your debt. They think I'm sentimental. I need to show them I'm not." He walked over to me, stopping just inches away. He reached out, his hand cupping the back of my neck, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. "I have to end this, Emily. Today, before they get close enough to hurt you again. I'm safe here," I whispered, leaning into his touch despite the fear clawing at my throat. "You are," he affirmed. "Rocco is outside with the A-team. The perimeter is mined. The doors are blast-proof. You do not open this door for anyone but me. Do you understand? Not for police, not for fire, only me." "I understand," I said. "But take backup, please. I'm taking Silvio and a skeleton crew. Too many men looks like an invasion. I need to look confident." He kissed my forehead, a brief, hard press of his lips. I left my laptop on the table in the main room. It has access to the security feeds. "Watch the perimeter if you want, but don't leave the bunker." He pulled away, the loss of contact physical. "I'll be back by dinner. Promise?" He paused at the door, his hand on the heavy iron handle. He looked back at me, and for a second the mask slipped. "I promise." Then he was gone. The heavy thud of the door locking echoed through the concrete space, sealing me in. I showered quickly, scrubbing the smell of smoke and sex from my skin, though I couldn't scrub away the worry. I dressed in the only clothes I had, Marco's spare tactical pants that I rolled up at the ankles, and a thick wool sweater I found in a closet. I looked ridiculous, like a child playing soldier, but I needed to feel prepared. I paced the main room for an hour. The silence of the safe house was oppressive. It was a sterile box of concrete and glass, suspended over a ravine, completely isolated from the world. I checked the windows. Nothing but pine trees and gray sky. I checked the front door monitor. Rocco was standing there, an assault rifle across his chest, looking like a statue. I couldn't just sit there. My mind was racing, replaying the attack at the restaurant, the man in the service door. How had he known? How had they known we would be at Lombra? It was a last-minute decision. Marco hadn't even told his driver until we were in the car. Intelligence leak. The words floated in my mind, cold and logical. I walked over to the dining table where Marco had left his laptop. It was a sleek, military-grade machine, rugged and unpretentious. He had left it so I could watch the cameras. But Marco knew who I was. He knew I had organized his office. He knew I had access. I opened the lid. The screen came to life, demanding a password. I typed in the one he had given me for the scheduling software weeks ago. Access granted. I wasn't looking for security feeds. I was looking for the money. In my years as an asset manager, and later as an executive assistant who practically ran the CFO's life, I had learned one universal truth. People lie, but numbers don't. Betrayal always leaves a receipt. If someone had sold us out, they had been paid for it. I opened the remote server access, navigating to the financial ledgers I had color-coded just days ago. I started with the recent transactions. The West Side Project accounts, the payroll. The bribes disguised as consulting fees. Everything looked normal on the surface. Marco was meticulous, but I wasn't looking for the big picture. I was looking for the cracks. I pulled up the accounts for the last 48 hours. Nothing. I went back a week. Still nothing obvious. I felt a headache forming behind my eyes, the glare of the screen burning into my retinas. I was wasting time. Marco was out there walking into a war, and I was playing accountant. Think, Emily. Think. The man in the kitchen door. He knew exactly where to stand. He knew the layout. That meant the leak wasn't just about location. It was about strategy. I opened the personnel files. Who had access to Marco's schedule? The driver, Rocco, Silvio, and me. I ruled myself out. I ruled out the driver. He had taken a bullet for us in the car escape. Rocco was standing outside ready to die for me. That left Silvio, the consigliere, Marco's right hand, the man who had been with the family for 20 years. It was impossible. He was like an uncle to Marco. But in finance, impossible is just a discrepancy you haven't found yet. I went into the subledger for operational expenses. This was the slush fund, cash payments for informants, cleanup crews, and temporary safe houses. It was messy, designed to be untraceable. I started cross-referencing the withdrawals with the dates of security breaches. 3 months ago, a shipment of steel was hijacked at the docks. 2 days before that, a withdrawal of $50,000 was made from the slush fund for legal retainers. 2 months ago, a raid on one of Marco's gambling dens. 3 days prior, a withdrawal of $75,000 for permit expediting. Yesterday, the attack at Lombra. I scrolled frantically. There it was. A transfer made yesterday morning. $250,000. Not a withdrawal. A deposit. I froze. Why would the slush fund receive a deposit? The slush fund was for spending, not earning. I clicked on the transaction details. The source was obscured, routed through a shell company called Giano Imports. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened a new tab and ran a search on Giano Imports. It was a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. Dead end. But I wasn't just an admin. I was good at this. I pulled up the IP log for the transaction. The deposit hadn't been authorized by an external bank. It had been an internal transfer disguised as external. Someone had moved money from a hidden account into the slush fund to cover a shortfall, perhaps hoping no one would notice the balance fluctuation. I traced the originating account. It was a blind trust. I needed the access key. Who authorized the movement? I typed in a command prompt, bypassing the user interface to look at the metadata of the ledger entry. User ID, SR Consigliere 01. Silvio. Silvio had moved money into the family accounts. Why? To hide theft? No. The amount was too specific. $250,000. I dug deeper into the blind trust. I couldn't see the owner, but I could see the counterparty for previous transactions. Calabrese Waste Management. The 'Ndrangheta. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. Silvio wasn't just stealing. He was on their payroll. The 'Ndrangheta had been paying him. And yesterday, he had moved a large sum back into Marco's accounts. Why? To frame someone else? Or to pay for the hit squad? Oh my God. I whispered to the empty room. I minimized the finance windows and opened Marco's communication logs. If Silvio was the traitor, he would be communicating with them. I found an encrypted email in the drafts folder of the shared server, a folder that Silvio and Marco both used to drop notes for each other without sending actual emails that could be intercepted. The subject line was blank. The body of the text was a single line of coordinates and a time. Dock 4, warehouse, 9:12 p.m. No weapons, peace terms. I checked the time on the laptop. 11:15 a.m. Marco had said he was going to a parlay. He was going to Dock 4. I scrolled down. There was a response, hidden in the metadata of the draft, time-stamped 10 minutes after Marco left the safe house. He is en route. Minimal guard. Take him at the gate. Make it look like a negotiation gone wrong. The sender of the response wasn't Marco. It was signed with a single initial, S. Silvio. Silvio was leading him into an execution. It wasn't a parlay. It was a slaughter. Marco was walking into a trap with the very man who had sold him out standing right beside him. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I grabbed my phone, the burner Marco had given me. I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. Pick up, pick up, pick up, I hissed, redialing. Voicemail again. He must have turned his phone off for the meeting, or they were using jammers. I tried the main line for the car. Nothing. I tried Silvio's number. It rang once, then disconnected. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the concrete floor. I couldn't breathe. Marco was 45 minutes away from dying. He was going to walk into Warehouse 9, thinking he was negotiating a truce, and Silvio was going to put a bullet in the back of his head. I looked at the door monitor. Rocco. I ran to the heavy steel door and pounded on it. Rocco, open up! The heavy bolt slid back, and the door cracked open. Rocco stood there, his face impassive, his massive frame blocking the exit. Signorina, he said, his voice deep and gravelly. You are to stay inside. Boss's orders. Rocco, listen to me, I said, breathless, holding the laptop up so he could see the screen. Though I knew the code would mean nothing to him. You have to call Marco. You have to stop him. He isn't the only one who dies if you let him walk into that trap. Everything we've built to keep Lily safe burns with him. The boss is in a secure blackout. No comms until the meeting is over, Rocco said, making a move to close the door. It's standard protocol. It's a trap, I screamed, jamming my foot in the door. Rocco, look at me. It's a trap. Silvio is the leak. He's working for the 'Ndrangheta. Rocco stopped. His expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Silvio has been with the family since before you were born, Signorina. You should go back inside. You're upset. I am not upset! I am an auditor! I shouted, desperation making me reckless. I turned the laptop screen toward him. Look at the logs! User ID SR Consigliere. He authorized a transfer from a Calabrese shell company yesterday. He sent the coordinates to the hit squad. Read the draft. Rocco glanced at the screen. He saw the email draft. He is en route. Take him at the gate. He stiffened. He looked at the timestamp. Silvio is in the car with him, Rocco said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Exactly, I pleaded. If Marco walks into that warehouse, he dies, and Silvio takes over the family. You have to let me go. We have to warn him. Rocco looked at me. then at the forest road, then back at the laptop. He was a soldier. He followed orders. His orders were to keep me locked in. I can't let you leave, Rocco said slowly. Then he dies, I said, my voice breaking. And you will be the one who stood here and let it happen. You swore to protect him, Rocco. Is protecting his orders more important than protecting his life? Rocco's jaw worked. He was fighting a war between loyalty to the hierarchy and loyalty to the man. The comms are blacked out, he muttered. Even if I call, he won't answer. The jammers at the docks will kill the signal. Then we have to go there, I said. We have to physically stop him. It's an hour drive. The meeting is in 45 minutes. Then we drive fast, I said. Rocco, please. I saved him in the kitchen. I saw the threat when he didn't. I am telling you, I see this one too. Trust me. Rocco looked into my eyes. He saw the same thing Marco had seen the night before. Not a hysterical girl, but a partner. A woman who had crunched the numbers and found the devil in the details. He stepped back. Get in the car, he barked, turning to his men. Tony, stay here. Secure the perimeter. Vinny, you drive. We're moving out. Now. I didn't wait to be told twice. I sprinted toward the armored SUV parked on the gravel. I still had the laptop clutched to my chest like a shield. We peeled out of the safe house driveway, gravel spraying behind us. Rocco sat in the front seat, racking the slide of his rifle. If you're wrong about this, Emily, he said, staring out the windshield. Marco will kill me himself for letting you leave the safe house. If I'm wrong, I said, watching the trees blur past as the driver pushed the heavy vehicle to 80 miles an hour on the winding road. I'll let him. But I knew I wasn't wrong. The numbers didn't lie. I stared at the digital clock on the dashboard. 11:25 a.m. 35 minutes. Marco was walking into a cage, and the man holding the key was the one he trusted most. I gripped the door handle, my knuckles white, praying that the armored engine could outrun fate. Drive faster, I whispered. We're doing 90, Signorina, the driver said, his hands tight on the wheel. Faster, I ordered, channeling every ounce of Marco's authority I had absorbed. Or we're all dead. The engine roared in response, pushing us down the mountain, racing toward the city and the betrayal waiting at the water's edge. I wasn't just the fiancé anymore. I wasn't just the asset. I was the failsafe. And I was coming for him. The speedometer on the dashboard of the armored SUV read 95 miles per hour. But it felt like we were crawling. The trees outside were a blur of green and gray, smeared by the speed and the vibration of the heavy chassis, fighting against the winding mountain road. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension and the smell of gun oil. I sat in the back seat, clutching the laptop to my chest as if it were a life preserver. My knuckles were white, my breathing shallow. Every time the driver, Vinny, took a corner too sharp, I braced myself against the door, praying the tires would hold. Rocco, I said, my voice cutting through the roar of the engine. How far? Rocco was in the passenger seat, his massive frame hunched over a radio that was spitting out nothing but static. He looked back at me, his face grim. 30 minutes out, if traffic holds. We don't have 30 minutes, I whispered, looking at the clock. 11:35 a.m. Marco was walking into the warehouse at noon. 25 minutes. Try him again, I ordered. Rocco sighed, a sound of frustration that rumbled in his chest. I've tried the main line, the backup, and the encrypted channel. It's dead air, Signorina. They're jamming the signal radius around the docks, just like you said they would. The confirmation brought no satisfaction, only a cold dread that settled in my stomach like a stone. I had been right. The numbers hadn't lied. Silvio was orchestrating a massacre, and Marco, brilliant, dangerous, terrifying Marco, was walking into it blind because he trusted the man standing at his shoulder. Can we go faster? I asked Vinny. I'm pushing a 6-ton vehicle down a 2-lane road, ma'am, Vinny said, his eyes glued to the asphalt. Any faster and we go off the cliff. I looked out the window at the sheer drop on my right. The ravine was deep, swallowed by the forest. I didn't care. Just get us there. I opened the laptop again, staring at the frozen screen of the email draft. He is en route. Take him at the gate. It was a death warrant signed with a digital initial. I traced the screen with a trembling finger. I had spent my life organizing files, balancing budgets, and managing schedules. I had never imagined that my ability to spot a discrepancy in a ledger would be the only thing standing between a man and a bullet to the back of the head. "Rocco," I said, needing to distract myself from the ticking clock. "Silvio, how long has he been with the family?" Rocco didn't turn around this time. He kept his eyes on the road, scanning the tree line. 20 years. He served Marco's father. He taught Marco how to shoot. He is family. Why? I asked. Why would he do it? The money? Money is part of it, Rocco grunted. But usually it's power. Silvio was passed over when the old man died. He thought he should have been boss until Marco was ready. Maybe he got tired of waiting. He sold him for $250,000, I said, the disgust bitter in my mouth. That's the price of loyalty. Judas did it for 30 pieces of silver, Rocco muttered. Inflation hits everyone. The car swerved violently to the left, throwing me against the door. Watch it, Rocco barked. There's a truck, Vinny shouted, wrestling with the steering wheel. Blocking the lane. I looked up. Ahead of us, the road narrowed as it curved around a massive rock face. A heavy-duty delivery truck was parked sideways across both lanes, completely blocking the path. It's a roadblock, Rocco shouted, reaching for the assault rifle mounted on the dash. Reverse, Vinny, reverse. But it was too late. From the wooded ridge above us, a streak of light flashed. A rocket-propelled grenade. It didn't hit the car directly. It struck the asphalt 10 feet in front of the bumper. The explosion was deafening, a concussion that rattled my teeth and shattered the world into fire and smoke. The front of the SUV lifted off the ground. I screamed as gravity failed. The heavy vehicle was thrown backward like a toy, spinning out of control. We slammed into the guardrail. The metal shrieked, a horrible tearing sound, and then gave way. We were falling. The world became a washing machine of violence. The car rolled down the embankment, crushing trees, slamming against boulders. Glass shattered, metal crumpled. I was thrown against the ceiling, then the floor, the seatbelt cutting into my chest like a wire. The laptop flew out of my hands, becoming a projectile. Marco. The name was the only coherent thought in my mind as the darkness spun around me. The car came to a stop with a bone-jarring thud. We were upside down. Silence. For a long moment, there was only the hiss of steam from the ruptured radiator and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I hung suspended in the harness, blood rushing to my head. My vision was swimming with black spots. Rocco? I croaked. Vinny? No answer from the driver's seat. I twisted my head, pain shooting down my neck. Vinny was slumped over the wheel, his neck at an unnatural angle. He was gone. Signorina. The voice was weak, coming from below me, which was actually the roof of the car. Rocco had cut himself loose. He was crawling through the debris of the shattered windshield. I'm here, I gasped, fumbling for the buckle of my seatbelt. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't work the mechanism. I'm stuck. Hold on. Rocco dragged himself into the back compartment. His face was a mask of blood. A deep gash ran across his forehead, blinding one eye, and his left arm hung uselessly at his side. He pulled a knife from his boot with his good hand. Don't move, he wheezed. He slashed the belt. I dropped onto the roof of the car, landing in a pile of shattered glass. I cried out as a shard sliced into my palm, but Rocco grabbed my tactical vest and hauled me toward the broken window. We have to move, he said, his voice wet. They're coming down the hill to check the kill. We scrambled out of the wreckage into the damp earth of the ravine. The air smelled of pine needles and burning rubber. Above us, on the road, I could hear shouting and the slamming of car doors. Silvio's cleanup crew, Rocco spat, leaning heavily against a tree. He checked his rifle. It was damaged. The stock cracked. He pulled a handgun from his hip holster instead and handed it to me. I stared at the weapon. It was heavy, cold, and terrifying. I don't know how to use this, I whispered. Point and pull, Rocco said. Safety is off. Take it. I took the gun. My hands were trembling violently. Go, Rocco ordered, pointing deeper into the woods, away from the road. Head south. Follow the creek. It leads to the highway. I'm not leaving you, I said, seeing the way he was swaying. You're hurt. I'm dead, Emily, he said, using my name for the first time. He looked down at his side. A piece of shrapnel from the explosion had pierced his vest. The dark stain was spreading fast. I just need to buy you 5 minutes. No, I sobbed, shaking my head. No, we go together. Marco will fix this. He always fixes it. Marco isn't here, Rocco said softly. You are. You're the failsafe, remember? A branch snapped nearby, heavy boots crunching on dry leaves. They were close. Go, Rocco roared, shoving me hard. Run! I stumbled back, tears blurring my vision. Rocco turned toward the slope, raising his weapon, positioning himself behind the wreckage of the SUV to create a choke point. Hey! Rocco shouted up the hill, his voice booming with defiance. Is that you, Tony? You traitorous piece of shit! Come down here and face me! Gunfire erupted from the ridge. Rocco returned fire, calm and steady, drawing their attention, drawing their hate. I turned and ran. I ran blindly through the underbrush, branches whipping my face, tearing at my clothes. I slipped on wet moss, scrambled up, and kept running. Behind me, the rhythmic pop, pop, pop of the handgun was drowned out by the roar of automatic weapons. Then, silence. I stopped, clutching a birch tree for support, my chest heaving so hard I thought my ribs would crack. The silence was worse than the noise. It meant Rocco was gone. It meant the shield was broken. I was alone in the woods with a gun I didn't know how to shoot, and a hit squad on my tail. But I wasn't just running for me. I checked the time on my burner phone, which had miraculously survived in my pocket. 11:50 a.m. 10 minutes. I had no signal here in the ravine. I needed high ground. I looked up the slope on the other side of the creek. It was steep, rocky. I scrambled up, clawing at roots and dirt, my fingernails breaking, my knees scraping against stone. I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the ticking clock. I reached the top of the ridge. I gasped for air, pulling the phone out. 1 bar of service. Please, I whispered to the universe. Please. I dialed Marco. It rang. 1 ring, 2 rings. Come on, come on. Voice command, the automated operator stated. Please leave a message. Voicemail. The jammers were working, or he was already inside. I ended the call and dialed again. I started running along the ridge, trying to find a better signal, trying to get closer to the cell tower I could see in the distance. Below me, to my left, I heard a shout. There, on the ridge, red hair. They had spotted me. Bullets zipped through the leaves around me, snapping branches. I didn't look back. I just ran. I dialed again. Ring. Ring. Click. This is Marco. It wasn't a live answer. It was his recording. Cold. Professional. Damn it! I screamed. I was about to hang up when the phone beeped. The call connected. Not to voicemail. To the line. Marco? I shouted. Marco. Static. A hiss of white noise. Then a faint voice. Signal is spotty here, Silvio. You sure this is the place? He had answered. Or the phone had auto-answered in his pocket. Or maybe the jammer was intermittent at the gate. Marco! I screamed into the phone, pressing it so hard against my ear it hurt. Don't go in, it's a trap. Static crackled. Just protocol, boss. I heard a voice reply. Silvio's voice. Smooth, reassuring. Leave the phones in the car. They wanted a clean meet. Marco, listen to me! I yelled, stopping running to focus everything on the connection. Silvio is the traitor. He's with them. He paid for the hit. Marco! A bullet struck the tree right next to my head, sending a spray of bark into my face. I flinched, dropping to my knees behind a boulder. I hear something. Marco's voice came through, tinny and distant. Did you hear that? Interference, Silvio said. Come on. They're waiting. I was losing him. He was walking away from the phone, or the signal was dying. Silvio! I screamed, using every ounce of air in my lungs. Marco! Silvio is the traitor. Look at him. He sold you. Don't go in the warehouse. I didn't know if he heard me. The line filled with static, then cut out completely. Call ended. I stared at the screen. 11:58 a.m. Those next few minutes smeared into a blur. More sensation than memory. Time leaking out between heartbeats until noon felt less like a number and more like a weight pressing down on my chest. I had done everything. I had found the leak. I had convinced Rocco. I had survived a crash. I had run through a forest, and I still didn't know if it was enough. A shadow fell over me. I spun around, raising the gun Rocco had given me, but I was too slow. A boot kicked the weapon from my hand, sending it skittering over the edge of the cliff. I looked up. 3 men stood over me, dressed in tactical gear, their faces covered by balaclavas. The logo on their vests wasn't police. It wasn't Ravellini. It was a snake coiled around a dagger. And Ndrangheta. She's the one, the lead man said, his voice muffled. Silvio said to bring her alive if possible. He wants to use her as leverage if the boss survives the initial volley. I scrambled back, but my back hit a rock. There was nowhere to go. Don't touch me, I snarled, channeling every bit of rage I had left. You have no idea what you've done. Marco will kill every single one of you, the man laughed. He reached down and grabbed a fistful of my hair, hauling me to my feet. I cried out, clawing at his gloves, but he was too strong. Marco is dead, sweetheart, he hissed in my ear. Or he will be in about 2 minutes. And you? You're the consolation prize. He dragged me toward the trees where a black van was waiting on a logging road I hadn't seen. Let me go, I kicked out, connecting with his shin. But he didn't even flinch. He punched me hard in the stomach. The air left my lungs. I doubled over, retching. Bag her, he ordered. Rough hands grabbed my arms. A canvas hood was shoved over my head, plunging me into darkness. I smelled stale sweat and burlap. Throw her in the back. We need to get to the extraction point. I was lifted off my feet and tossed like a sack of garbage onto a metal floor. The doors slammed shut. The engine roared to life. I lay there in the dark, gasping for breath, my ribs aching, my palm bleeding. Tears hot and angry streamed down my face. Rocco is dead. Vinny is dead. Marco. I clamped my mouth shut, refusing to finish that thought. Marco wasn't dead. He couldn't be. He was the smartest man I knew. He was a survivor. But doubt, cold and insidious, crept in. I had heard Silvio's voice. They were walking away from the car. Had he heard me? Had the signal cut out before I screamed Silvio's name? The van lurched forward, bouncing over the rough terrain. I was a prisoner again. A pawn in a game I had tried so hard to master. But as I lay there in the dark, I felt something hard in my pocket pressing against my hip. My phone. They hadn't searched me. They assumed I was just a hysterical girl they had picked up in the woods. They didn't know I was the auditor who had unraveled their entire scheme. I didn't dare move yet. I waited, counting the seconds, trying to map the turns of the van in my mind. If Marco was dead, I was going to die too. But if he was alive, if he had heard that one word, Silvio, I closed my eyes under the hood and prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Let him have heard. Let him be the monster they fear. Let him kill them all. Because if Marco Ravellini was still standing, the Ndrangheta hadn't just kidnapped a girl. They had stolen the heart of a demon, and he would burn the world down to get it back. The canvas hood over my head smelled of gasoline and old sweat, a suffocating darkness that amplified every bump in the road. My hands were zip-tied behind my back, the plastic digging into my wrists until my fingers went numb, but the physical pain was distant, muted by the sheer, overwhelming terror that clawed at my chest. Not terror for myself, terror for him. I lay on the cold metal floor of the van, sliding slightly with every turn, my mind replaying the last few seconds of that phone call on the ridge. Silvio. I had screamed it. I had screamed it with every ounce of breath in my bruised lungs. But had the signal held? Had the words cut through the static and the jammers? Or was Marco walking into the slaughterhouse right now, thinking his oldest friend was simply having radio trouble? The van slowed, turning sharply onto gravel, then came to a halt. The engine died. For a moment, there was silence. No birds, no wind, just the ticking of the cooling metal and the frantic thud of my own heart against the floorboards. The back doors flew open. Rough hands grabbed my ankles and hauled me out. I hit the ground hard, the gravel biting into my shoulder, but I didn't cry out. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Up! A voice barked. I was hauled to my feet, swaying dizzily. The hood was ripped off. I blinked against the sudden assault of light, though it was dim. We were inside a massive, cavernous structure, an abandoned shipyard warehouse. Sunlight filtered through holes in the rusted corrugated roof, creating beams of dusty light that illuminated the decay. The air tasted of salt, rot, and oil. In the center of the vast space, sitting on a folding chair, as if he were waiting for a concert to begin, was a man in an immaculate gray suit. Silvio. He looked up from his watch as I was dragged forward. His face was calm, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his demeanor that of a grandfatherly figure waiting for Sunday dinner. It was sickening. Gentle. Silvio chided the guards, his voice smooth and cultured. She is not a combatant. She is leverage. She's a problem. One of the masked men grunted, shoving me forward so I stumbled to my knees in front of Silvio. She was on the ridge. She had a phone. Silvio's eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in his composure. A phone? We took it, the guard said, pulling my burner phone from his pocket and tossing it to Silvio. But she was screaming into it before we got to her. Silvio caught the phone. He looked at it, then at me. Did you make a call, Emily? I looked up at him, spitting a strand of hair out of my mouth. My lip was split, and I could taste the copper tang of blood. I called Marco. Silvio smiled, a pitying, condescending expression. Marco is currently entering the east gate of the terminal. The jammers there are military grade. You could have screamed until your throat bled, my dear. He didn't hear you. He heard me. I lied, injecting every ounce of certainty I could muster into my voice. I told him everything. He knows you're the traitor. He knows you sold him to the Calabresi. Silvio studied my face, looking for the tell. He was a master manipulator, a man who had survived decades in the Mafia politics. He stood up slowly, walking over to me. He crouched down, bringing his face level with mine. You are bluffing, he decided softly. You are a smart girl. An accountant, yes? You found the discrepancy. I admit I underestimated you. I thought Marco picked you for your face. I didn't realize he picked you for your brain. He didn't pick me, I hissed. He saved me. Something you wouldn't understand. Saved you? Silvio laughed, standing up and brushing invisible dust from his trousers. Marco is a boy playing at being a king. He is soft. He buys debts. He makes peace treaties. The Ravellini family was built on fear, not real estate deals. I am simply correcting the course. He checked his watch again. 12:05 p.m. By now, Silvio announced to the room, the initial volley has begun. Marco is dead. My men at the gate will have confirmed the kill. Once I receive the picture, we will decide what to do with you. You're going to kill me, I said flatly. Eventually. Silvio shrugged. But first, I need the access codes to the offshore accounts Marco set up for the construction project. You are the only other person with administrative access. Once you give them to me, then you can join him. I'll never give them to you. Everyone gives them up eventually, Silvio said, turning his back on me to walk toward a table where a radio set was humming. Pain is a very effective key. He picked up the radio handset. Team Alpha, report. Is the target down? Static. Silvio frowned. He adjusted the frequency dial. Team Alpha, report status. Silence. Just the hiss of white noise. Team Beta, Silvio said, his voice tightening. Check the gate. Why is there no confirmation? Silence. A cold shiver went down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. Team Charlie, Silvio barked, abandoning the calm facade. Perimeter check, now. Boss, one of the masked guards standing near the entrance of the warehouse said, his voice trembling slightly. I can't reach the lookout. Silvio spun around, his eyes wide. What do you mean you can't reach him? He's not answering. The warehouse suddenly felt very big and very empty. The dust motes dancing in the light seemed to freeze. He's here, I whispered. Silvio whipped his head around to look at me. Shut up. He heard me, I said, a smile breaking through the blood on my lip. And now, he's coming for you. Secure the doors, Silvio screamed at his 3 guards. Kill her if anyone enters. The guard nearest me raised his rifle, aiming it at my head. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the end. Thwip. A sound like a wet towel snapping. The guard didn't fire. Instead, a red mist sprayed across my face. He gargled, a horrible wet sound, and collapsed backward. A black arrow, a crossbow bolt, was buried in his throat. Contact! The second guard screamed, spinning toward the shadows of the catwalks above. Thwip. The second guard dropped, an arrow protruding from his eye socket. Silvio scrambled backward, pulling a silver pistol from his jacket. Show yourself! Show yourself, you coward! There was no answer. Only the terrifying silence of a predator who had already won. The third guard, the one who had dragged me from the van, panicked. He grabbed me by the back of my sweater, hauling me up as a human shield, pressing the barrel of his gun to my temple. Come out, or she dies, he shrieked, his voice cracking with hysteria. I'll blow her brains out, I swear to God! From the darkness of the loading bay entrance, a figure emerged. It wasn't the Marco I knew. It wasn't the man in the bespoke suits or the tuxedo. This was a shadow made flesh. He moved with a terrifying, fluid silence. He was covered in grime, his shirt torn, a smear of blood on his cheek that wasn't his. In his hand, he didn't hold a gun. He held a tactical knife, the blade black and non-reflective. He stopped 20 feet away. He didn't look at Silvio. He didn't look at the dead men. His eyes, black, empty voids of pure violence, were locked on the man holding the gun to my head. Let her go, Marco said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a whisper that carried across the warehouse like a funeral bell. Stay back, the guard yelled, pressing the gun harder against my skin. Drop the knife. Drop it. Marco tilted his head slightly. You are shaking, Carlo. Your finger is slipping on the trigger. If you fire, you miss the kill shot, and if you miss the kill shot, I will peel the skin from your bones while you are still conscious. The guard, Carlo, was shaking. Marco's psychological warfare was hitting him hard. Silvio, Carlo pleaded, looking at his boss. Do something. Silvio was backed against the table, his gun pointed at Marco, but his hand was trembling. Shoot him, you idiot! Shoot him! No, Marco said. He took a step forward. I said stop, Carlo screamed. Marco moved. It was faster than thought. He didn't run. He exploded into motion. He threw the knife. It was an impossible throw. 20 feet. A moving target. A hostage in the way. The blade buried itself in Carlo's shoulder, right in the nerve cluster. The arm holding the gun to my head went instantly dead, the weapon clattering to the floor. I dropped to the ground, rolling away as Marco closed the distance. Carlo tried to reach for his sidearm with his other hand, but Marco was there. Marco didn't slow down. He slammed a knee into Carlo's chest, shattering ribs, and then delivered a single brutal strike to the throat. Carlo fell, choking, dying before he hit the ground. Marco stood over him for a second, then turned slowly to face Silvio. Silvio was the only one left. He stood by the table, his silver pistol raised, aiming at Marco's chest. But he didn't fire. He looked at Marco, and I saw something break in his eyes. He saw the monster he had helped create, and he knew he couldn't kill it. Marco, Silvio whispered. Marco walked toward him. He didn't have a weapon in his hands anymore. He walked straight toward the gun. Shoot me, Silvio, Marco said, his voice devoid of emotion. You sold me. You set the trap. Finish it. Silvio's hand wavered. It was business, Marco. The family. You were weak. You were letting the legacy die. I was building an empire, Marco corrected, stopping 3 feet from the barrel of the gun. You were just digging graves. I had to, Silvio shouted, his composure shattering. The 'ndrangheta. They offered me the seat. They offered me the respect your father never gave me. They offered you silver, Marco said. And you bought a ticket to hell. Marco reached out. He moved slowly, deliberately. He wrapped his hand around the barrel of Silvio's gun. Silvio gasped, trying to pull it back, but Marco's grip was granite. Marco stepped in, chest to chest with the man who had been his uncle, his mentor, his betrayer. You taught me to shoot, Marco said softly. You taught me to lead, but you forgot to teach me how to forgive. Marco twisted the gun. A sickening snap echoed, Silvio's finger breaking inside the trigger guard. Silvio screamed, dropping the weapon. Marco didn't strike him. He didn't punch him. He simply grabbed Silvio by the throat with one hand and lifted him. Silvio clawed at Marco's wrist, his legs kicking uselessly, but Marco was immovable. He slammed Silvio back against a steel support pillar. Emily, Marco said, not looking at me. Turn around. No, I said. I was on my knees, my wrists still bound behind me, dust and blood covering my clothes. But I wouldn't look away. I had found the leak. I had driven the car. I had been part of this war. I wouldn't look away from the victory. Turn around, Marco repeated, his voice straining with the effort of holding back his rage. No, I said again, louder. I want to see it. He sold us. He tried to kill you. I want to see him end. Marco looked at me then. His eyes were wild, terrifying. But when they met mine, they flickered. He saw the resolve in my face. He saw that I wasn't the innocent civilian anymore. I was his equal in the dark. He turned back to Silvio. Silvio's face was turning purple, his eyes bulging. Marco, please, family, you are not family, Marco whispered. You are a cancer. Marco reached into his boot and pulled out a second knife. He didn't drag it out. He made it quick, efficient. A soldier's death, which was more than Silvio deserved. He drove the blade into Silvio's heart, twisting once. Silvio stiffened, his eyes locking on Marco's, and then the light went out. He slumped, dead weight in Marco's grip. Marco let him go. The body slid down the pillar, leaving a streak of dark blood on the steel. Silence returned to the warehouse. The dust motes continued to dance in the light, undisturbed by the violence that had just occurred. Marco stood there for a long moment, staring at the body. His chest was heaving. His hands were covered in blood. Silvio's, the guards, his own. He looked broken. Not physically, but spiritually. He had just killed the last link to his father. Then, he turned to me. He walked over, his steps heavy. He knelt in front of me. I looked at him, at the blood, the grime, the utter devastation in his expression. You're hurt, he said, his voice cracking. He reached out to touch my face, but stopped, looking at his bloody hands. He pulled them back, afraid to stain me. I'm fine, I whispered. Just a split lip. He choked on the word. He looked at the zip ties binding my wrists. I'm sorry. God, Emily, I'm so sorry. He moved behind me. I felt the cold steel of the knife against my skin, terrified for a second, but then the plastic snapped. My arms fell free. I brought them forward, rubbing my wrists, groaning as the blood flow returned. I turned to face him. He was still kneeling, his head bowed, looking at the floor. You should run, he said, his voice hollow. Take the van. Go. Don't go back to the penthouse. Don't go to the safe house. Just go. I'll transfer money to you. Disappear. What? I stared at him. Marco, what are you talking about? Look at me, he roared, looking up, his eyes filled with self-loathing. Look at what I am. I am death, Emily. I kill everything I touch. I killed my own family today. I almost got you killed. I am poison. He stood up, backing away from me. I was arrogant. I thought I could keep you. I thought I could have the light and the dark. But I can't. The dark consumes everything. If you stay, you die. Next time I might be 10 seconds too slow. Next time, the arrow misses. So you're firing me? I asked, standing up. My legs were shaky, but I locked my knees. "The contract is void. There is no contract," he shouted, pacing in a tight circle. "There is only you staying alive, and that only happens if you are far away from me." I watched him. I saw the terror in him. It wasn't the terror of the Andrangeda or the police. It was the terror of loving something and knowing you could destroy it. I walked toward him. "Stop," he warned, holding up a bloody hand. "Don't come near me." I didn't stop. I walked right up to him. I reached out and took his bloody hand in mine. He flinched, trying to pull away, but I held on. I interlaced our fingers, mixing the blood on his skin with the dirt on mine. "You're right," I said. "You are dangerous. You are violent. You just killed 4 men in front of me, Emily, but you didn't kill me," I said, stepping closer, pressing my body against his ruined shirt. "You came for me. You walked into a trap because you heard my voice. You stripped the skin off your life to save mine." I reached up with my other hand and cupped his jaw, forcing him to look at me. "I called you," I whispered, "on the ridge, when the guards were coming. I didn't call the police. I didn't run away. I called you. Do you know why?" Marco stared at me, his breathing ragged, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "Why? Because you are the only person who could save me," I said. "And I am the only person who could save you." I looked over his shoulder at Silvio's body. "You didn't kill your family, Marco. He wasn't your family. He was a traitor." I looked back at him. "Family doesn't sell you. Family doesn't leave you to die in a warehouse. Family comes for you, no matter what." Marco let out a sob, a harsh, broken sound. He collapsed forward, burying his face in my neck. His arms went around me, crushing me to him, lifting me off my feet. He held me like I was the only solid thing in a disintegrating universe. "I thought I lost you," he groaned against my skin. "When I heard the scream on the phone, I thought I was too late." "You weren't late," I said, running my fingers through his matted hair. "You were right on time." He pulled back, searching my face, his eyes scanning every inch of me. "I love you," he said. The words were fierce, desperate. "I love you so much it hurts. I will burn the whole world before I let anyone touch you again." "I know," I said. "And I love you. Now, can we please get out of here? This place smells like dead traitor." Marco laughed. It was a wet, shaky sound, but it was real. He kissed me hard, tasting of blood and salt, sealing the promise between us. "Let's go home," he said. He picked me up, carrying me bridal style. He stepped over the bodies of the guards, stepped over the wreckage of his past, and carried me out into the sunlight. Outside, the air was fresh. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, the police finally responding to the chaos at the gate. But it didn't matter. We walked to the black van Silvio's men had used. Marco placed me in the passenger seat, buckling me in with shaking hands. He walked around to the driver's side. As we drove away from the docks, leaving the carnage behind, I looked at him. He was a mess. He was a killer. He was a Mafia don who had just started a war he would have to finish. But he was mine. And as I looked down at my hand, resting on the center console, still covered in the grime of the battle, I saw the diamond ring. It was dirty, scratched, but it was still there, unbroken. "Marco?" I asked quietly. "Yeah?" "We're even now," I said. "You saved me. I saved you." He glanced at me, a ghost of his old smirk appearing. "Not quite even. I think I still owe you a wedding." I smiled, leaning my head back against the seat as exhaustion finally claimed me. "Make it a big one, and make sure the security is better. For you, Piccola," he promised, taking my hand and bringing it to his lips. "I'll build a fortress," and I knew he would. 2 years. It is a strange thing to measure time not in hours of fear or days of debt, but in seasons of peace. The calendar on the wall of the kitchen, a sleek, modern thing that I had picked out to replace the austere slate that used to hang there, said it was November again. The rain was hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, just as it had on the night I first stumbled through those double doors, soaking wet and terrified. But tonight, the sound wasn't a threat. It was a melody. It was the background music to a life that I had built, brick by brick, lie by lie, and finally, truth by truth. I stood by the kitchen island, swirling a glass of deep red Barolo, watching the scene in the living room. The space had changed. The cold, museum-like quality of Marco's fortress had been softened. There were throws of cashmere draped over the leather sofas. There were fresh flowers, white lilies and hydrangeas, in crystal vases on the side tables. There were framed photographs on the mantel, proof that life existed here, not just survival. And there was laughter. Lily was sitting on the rug near the fireplace, her legs tucked under her, gesturing animatedly with a piece of garlic bread. She looked older, wiser, but the shadows that had haunted her eyes 2 years ago were gone, replaced by the bright, unburdened spark of a young woman who had the world at her feet. So then Professor Holloway said my thesis on moral ambiguity in Renaissance literature was disturbingly insightful, Lily said, grinning. I told him I had good inspiration. Marco, sitting in his favorite armchair with a relaxed posture that would have been impossible for him 2 years ago, chuckled. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a charcoal sweater and dark jeans, looking less like the capo of New York and more like a man enjoying a Sunday dinner. Disturbingly insightful, Marco mused, taking a sip of his wine. I like that. Perhaps we should hire this Holloway. We need better writers for the press releases. Don't you dare corrupt my professors, Marco, Lily teased, throwing a crust of bread at him. He caught it with a reflex speed that was the only betraying sign of who he really was. He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his dark eyes. I don't corrupt, Lily. I facilitate. I watched them, a lump forming in my throat. This was the promise kept. This was the reason I had walked into the fire. Lily was graduating next week, top of her class, with a job offer from a publishing house in London already on the table. She was safe. She was happy. She knew that Marco was in construction and private security, and while she wasn't stupid, she knew there was grit beneath the polish. She didn't know the blood. She didn't know about the warehouse. She didn't know about Silvio. She didn't know that the man joking with her had killed to keep her sitting on that rug. Emily, come save me, Lily called out, spotting me. Marco is trying to convince me that Machiavelli is a romantic. He is, I said, walking over and resting my hand on Marco's shoulder. I felt him lean into my touch instantly, his hand coming up to cover mine, grounding himself. If you view power as a love language, which he does. Terrifying, Lily laughed, standing up and brushing crumbs from her skirt. But I actually have to run. The girls are throwing a pre-graduation mixer at the Ecstatic, and if I'm late, Sarah will kill me. Marco stood up. The driver's downstairs. Tony will take you. I can take an Uber, Marco. Lily sighed. The eternal argument. You take the car, Marco said, his voice leaving no room for debate, though it was gentle. It's raining, and I prefer knowing you get there dry. Fine, fine. She rolled her eyes, but she walked over and hugged him. Thank you for dinner, and for everything. The tuition, the apartment. I know I don't say it enough. Marco hugged her back, stiffly at first, then patting her back awkwardly. He still wasn't used to innocent affection, but he was learning. You earned the grades, Lily. I just paid the bills. She pulled away and turned to me, squeezing me tight. I'll see you guys at the ceremony? Front row, I promised, kissing her cheek. Be safe. Text me when you get there. Rule number 2. She mimicked my voice with a grin. Total transparency. I know. We watched her leave. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing the silence back inside the penthouse. But it wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of before. It was a warm, shared quiet. Marco let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. She talks a lot. Is that normal for 21-year-olds? She's happy, Marco, I said, walking around to face him. She's allowed to talk. London, he muttered, picking up his wine glass again. It's far. We don't have a strong presence in London. Which is exactly why it's perfect, I said, taking the glass from his hand and placing it on the table. She gets to be Lily Foster there. Just Lily, not the sister-in-law of the Ravellini family. It's what we wanted. He looked at me. his eyes searching mine. Is it? You're going to miss her. I will, I admitted, but I have plenty to keep me busy here. I walked over to the side table and picked up a sleek black tablet. I tapped the screen, bringing up the quarterly reports for the Ravellini Foundation and the construction holdings. Speaking of busy, I said, shifting into the mode that had defined the last 2 years of my life. I went over the projections for the waterfront redevelopment. The unions are happy with the new contracts, but the cement suppliers are trying to gouge us on the price per ton. I flagged 3 invoices that don't match the agreed rates. Marco smirked, the predator surfacing just beneath the domestic surface. The Grecos trying to skim off the top? The Grecos, I confirmed. I already drafted a response holding payment until they rectify the billing errors. I also audited the charity gala expenses. The event planner was padding the catering budget by 15%. She's been fired, and I hired a new vendor who is vetted and actually knows how to make a risotto. Marco shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of awe and amusement. You fired the event planner? I tolerate theft from our enemies, Marco, I said, stepping closer to him, tapping his chest with the tablet. I do not tolerate theft from our own payroll. We run a tight ship. That's how we stay legitimate. That's how we stay safe. Legitimate. He repeated the word, tasting it. 2 years ago, legitimate had been a mask. Now, it was 70% of the reality. With Silvio gone and the Ndrangheta war settled in a bath of blood that I tried not to think about, Marco had consolidated power. But under my guidance, he had pivoted. We still had the shadows. There were always shadows. But the construction business, the shipping logistics, the real estate, it was clean. We were washing the blood out of the money so thoroughly that even the IRS sent us Christmas cards. Marco took the tablet from my hands and tossed it onto the sofa without looking. Marco, I protested. I spent 3 hours on those spreadsheets. The Grecos can wait until morning, he said, wrapping his arms around my waist and pulling me flush against him. And the event planner is already gone. Right now, I don't want to talk about cement or invoices. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. You smell like vanilla and rain. And you smell like expensive wine and danger, I murmured, my hands finding their way up to his shoulders, my fingers curling into the soft wool of his sweater. The danger is retired, he whispered against my skin. Though we both knew it was a lie. The danger was never retired. It was just managed. It was a sleeping dog at the foot of our bed. Is it? I asked, leaning back to look at him. He looked tired. Not the exhaustion of stress, but the good, heavy tiredness of a man who has held the world up for too long and finally found a place to set it down. The gray at his temples had spread slightly, giving him a distinguished look that made my knees weak. The city is quiet, he said. The families respect the boundaries. The police have no leads. We won, Emily. We did, I agreed. It hadn't been easy. The months after the warehouse had been a nightmare of paranoia and power plays. I had learned to shoot. Really shoot, not just point and pray. I had learned to drive evasively. I had learned which senators needed donations and which judges needed blackmail. I had become the queen on the chessboard, moving pieces to protect the king. And he had kept his promise. He had built a fortress around us. Not just of walls, but of loyalty. The men who guarded us now weren't mercenaries. They were believers. They had seen Marco walk into a trap for me, and they had seen me drive into a war zone for him. That kind of legend bought more security than money ever could. Marco turned us slowly, swaying slightly to music only he could hear, until we were facing the window. The city lay spread out below us, a grid of golden lights blurred by the rain. It looked beautiful from up here. It looked like a kingdom. Do you remember? He asked softly, looking at the reflection of us in the glass. Remember what? The night you walked in, he said. The storm was worse than this. You looked like a drowned rat. I laughed, swatting his arm. I looked mysterious and tragic, thank you very much. You looked terrified, he corrected, his voice dropping. And beautiful. The most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was sitting in that chair, thinking about how I was going to kill Silvio, thinking about how the walls were closing in. And then you walked in and started dancing to that terrible R&B song. I groaned. hiding my face in his chest. Please, let's never mention the dancing again. I have successfully rebranded as a shark of industry. Don't ruin my image. It was a memorable performance. He teased, kissing the top of my head. But you know what I thought? In that split second before you realized I wasn't the client? What? I thought, finally. I looked up at him. Finally what? Finally, something real, Marco said. My life was scripts, deals, betrayals. Everyone wanted something. Everyone was wearing a mask. And then this girl walks in, totally incompetent at deception, wearing her heart on her sleeve, desperate to save her sister. You were so bright. It hurt to look at you. Fiam, he tightened his arms around me. I locked that door because I knew if I let you go, the darkness would come back, and I wouldn't be able to stand it anymore. You locked the door because you're a possessive control freak, I countered softly, tracing the line of his jaw. That too, he admitted with a grin. But it worked. It worked, I agreed. I looked at the ring on my finger. We had replaced the original engagement ring, the one that had been a prop, with a simple gold band on our wedding day a year ago. A private ceremony on the terrace, just us, Lily, and the ghost of Rocco, who I still missed every day. Do you regret it? Marco asked suddenly, the playfulness vanishing. Regret what? The wrong door, he said. If you had gone to Penthouse 4, if you had danced for the actual bachelor party, you would have made your $300. You would have gone home. Maybe you would have figured another way out with the debt. You would have had a normal life. No guards, no guns, no husband who has to check under the car for bombs. I pulled away slightly, looking him dead in the eye. I saw the insecurity that still lived there, deep down. The fear that he had corrupted me, that he had stolen a life I should have had. Marco, I said firmly, look at me. He looked. If I had gone to the right door, I said, I would be an administrative assistant living in a studio apartment, worrying about rent, probably dating some guy named Chad who works in marketing and thinks excitement is trying a new IPA. Marco snorted. Chad. I would be safe, I continued. I would be normal, and I would be bored out of my mind, and I would be alone. I took his hand, the hand that had killed men, the hand that had signed treaties, the hand that held me when I had nightmares about the crash. I didn't want normal, I told him. I wanted this. I wanted a partner who would burn the world down for me. I wanted to feel like I mattered, not just to a company, but to history, to us. I turned back to the window, pulling him with me so his chest was against my back again. Besides, I added, watching the rain streak down the glass, I'm pretty sure Chad wouldn't have bought me a construction company for my birthday. It's a holding company, Marco corrected automatically. For tax purposes. Romantic, I whispered. He kissed the side of my neck, sending shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I try. We stood there for a long time, watching the storm. The world outside was chaotic, messy, and dangerous. There were still enemies. There were always enemies. The Ndrangheta was quiet, but snakes always grew back their heads eventually. The police were watching, waiting for a slip-up that I would never give them. But inside, the air was warm. The fire was crackling. My sister was safe in a car heading toward her future. My husband, the monster, the king, the love of my life, was holding me like I was the most precious thing in his vault. Hey, Marco? I asked. Do you think the staff is gone for the night? He lifted his head, listening. Maria left an hour ago. The security team is on the perimeter. We're alone. I turned in his arms, looping my hands around his neck, pulling him down until our lips were inches apart. I felt the change in him instantly, the shift from reflective to hungry. His hands slid down to my hips, gripping me tight. Good, I whispered, brushing my lips against his, because I seemed to remember a specific line you used on the night we met. Marco's eyes darkened, the gold flecks burning in the depths of the black. He knew exactly what I was talking about. A smirk played on his lips, wicked, arrogant, and devastatingly sexy. Is that so? He rumbled. I hummed. Something about a mistake. And a turn. He walked me backward until my legs hit the edge of the heavy oak dining table. He lifted me up effortlessly, setting me on the edge, moving between my knees. He looked at me with that same intensity he had in the warehouse, in the kitchen. In the first moment he saw me. "You mistook me for the stripper," he quoted, his voice a low growl that made my toes curl. He reached up and unzipped the back of my dress, the sound loud in the quiet room. "Now," Marco whispered, claiming my mouth with a kiss that tasted of wine, rain, and forever. My turn. I kissed him back, pouring everything I had into it. The fear, the relief, the love, the power. I wasn't the girl who had knocked on the wrong door. I was the woman who had kicked it down and claimed the castle. And as the storm raged on outside, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was exactly where I belonged.